If you want to remember lang, no, i-recap ko. We looked at recent history and we learned that change is slow, change is hard, but there's hope. Our panelists shared that we need to envision the world that we want to see and participate in taking the steps to get there, as Prof. Mary did for over 60 years, being mindful of the small wins along the way. Tonight, we continue to use history as a lens to look at social systems naman. March is Women's Month, at may trivia ako about this. I didn't know na may legal mandate pala ito na signed as far back as 1988 pala by then President Cory Aquino. Tapos yung isa pa is that the complete name ng month-long observance na ito ay Women's Role in History Month. Kaya timing na timing kasi tonight, we'll be taking a look at this. What were women's roles in Philippine history ba? Is the Philippines matriarchal or patriarchal? And does it even matter? So if you're watching now and have not yet shared the link to tonight's conversation with your family, friends, kamag-anak, kapamilya, i-share mo na. Meron pa tayong time, magsisimula pa tayo. Kaya take that link, share it to your friends, and if you're already online, shout out naman. Pwede namin basahin at kung may mga tanong kayo, pakisend na rin dito kasi kung mababasa namin yan, pwede naming sagutin online. Of course, if we don't have enough time to answer your questions, we will try to get back to it, perhaps on social media or through email. But please, please post your questions. We're going to try to answer the questions that you have tonight. If this is your first time tuning in naman to Isip Isak, these conversations on faith and society are brought to you by the Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture, or Isaac. Isaac shares biblical perspectives on issues in the public square using traditional and social media as part of its work in advocacy and popular education for good governance. You can visit our website or social media platforms for more information. Okay, so tingnan muna natin, meron na ba tayong mga shoutouts? Okay, meron tayong comment. Andito na si Ate Naji. Hello, Ate Naji. Thank you for tuning in. And I know that Ate Naji is tuning in from somewhere in Cainta. So hello, shout out to Ate Naji. We have some people in. So everyone, tonight we are joined actually by some friends of Isaac who have perspectives to share. And kung wala na tayong inaantay at ready na kayo, magsimula na tayo. First, we are honored to have with us Professor Feby Mangahas. She is a historian, researcher, author, and professor who has served beyond academia as a member of the Board of Commissioners at the National Historical Commission and the Board of National Commission on the Role of Filipino Women. She has also headed the Cultural Center of the Philippines Women's Program. Her essays on women and babaylan feminism are a significant grounding of feminism in Philippine culture and history. So glad to have you with us tonight, Prof. Fe.
Good evening. Ako din.
For Inquirer.net. Balita ko rin, top student to siya ni Professor Mary noon sa Politics, Government, and Citizenship class niya. Very happy to welcome you to Isip Isak, Jean.
Thank you so much.
I myself have so much to learn, and I think together with the audience, we are very interested to find out perspectives on these words that seem to be floating around. We hear it a lot, right? Especially patriarchy. Oh, the patriarchy. And sometimes I wonder, what does it mean? And whether our society is a patriarchy. And so it would be nice to hear actually from Prof. Fe, who is a historian and who has studied this extensively, and also a perspective naman from a contemporary perspective, mind you, also from Jean naman. So thank you so much for joining us. And perhaps to start off tonight's conversation, maybe we can get everyone on the same page on definitions for this evening.
And the women
Mm.
are in subsumed. Ang matriarchy naman is the opposite, where the women are dominant. Sila yung ruler, sila yung nasa army, sila yung nasa economic, and the men there are parang sa background lang, or maybe servants or performing minor roles. Pero walang ganyang mga society talaga kung iisipin mo, no? It's really, from the beginning, parang patriarchy, and women asserting themselves slowly and slowly hanggang wala rin naman talagang matriarchy, wala rin talagang real matriarchal societies, wala. So, kung ang Philippines ba ngayon, if you ask me, ano ba tayo? Patriarchy or matriarchy? I think sa surface, it would seem we are matriarchy. The women are active, parang dominante, or this or that. Pero underneath, it's really patriarchy. There is really limit sa women's roles and power, no? Pero if you ask me historically, maganda yung simula kasi natin. We lived in an environment na walang winter. So very benevolent ang nature natin. We live in a country na islands na napakadaming resources. So mga barangay na talaga namang self-sufficient. So wala dun yung mga mag-emergence ng patriarchy where the men had to do the fighting, the planting and all that production. May pagka mixed roles, you can go to the field and work with the men, and the men working at home, yung ganyan, may pagkaigalitayan. At kung may mga datus man or rulers, they are there because they have leadership qualities, they have personalities who can command the people pagka may mga emergencies, and we have pero yung women were prominent even in ancient societies na hindi nakikita sa mga history books. For example, alam lang natin leaders in ancient times, datus, sultan, di ba? O kaya yung mga maharlika group. But have you ever heard na ang mga prominent leaders nun were the datus, the sultans, and some of that people in technology na mga panday and all that. But the babaylan, di ba? Have you heard of the babaylan? When you took up Philippine history, was the babaylan ever mentioned as
Actually,
one of the prominent leaders in that ancient society? Wala kayong alam. In fact, when I heard about it nga in one forum, ang babaylan were men, di ba?
yes.
Sabi ko, and then later on lang, when I started researching on that, and it was a male professor of mine who introduced me to the idea na, hey, you've been talking of leaders and you have not even mentioned the women leaders. Who were they? Hindi namin alam. And then he said, babaylan. I thought the babaylans were men. Hindi, sabi niya. Ang major roles ng women noon, ng leaders, were women, sabi niya. If you have the dato, the sultan, you have to put the babaylan alongside because the women leaders controls practically all spheres of society. They were priests. Hindi nga na tinatawag na priestess kasi ang naglilid ng lahat ng rituals in ancient times were women. Kung meron mga magiging priest dyan, he has to be binabae. Kasi kailangan, if you lead rituals, magaling kang kumanta, magaling kang sumaya, magaling kang tumula, yung mga ganyan, di ba? And at the same time, very wise and all that. Kaya sabi niya, wala akong naririnig sa inyo, even historians, na merong babaylan leader. So that's the beginning of my knowledge of babaylan from a male professor pa, 'di ba? Nagaling pa sa Paris, sa Sorbonne, na dumating dito. Kaya yun wala talaga. Kayo, did you ever hear of the babaylan in your Philippine history course?
Actually, my knowledge of the babaylan was only as a medicine man. And so I'm fascinated to learn that hindi pala, historically the babaylan pala was a woman.
Yes, women. If men join them, they have to be, effeminate and experts in their field, di ba? Parang silang priest, doctor, cultural artist din. At the same time, mga lawyers then judges, kasi they were part of the community that formed the judges during pagka may mga conflicts. So woman leadership talaga. And that was really invisible in most Philippine history classes. So in my writings now, in my latest books on history, which are used in private schools, ando na siya.
Wow.
I've
Thank
already
you.
included her.
Thank you for unearthing this and educating
Ganyan. Communal, di ba? Kung may mga datu man dyan, they excelled in leadership, in certain skills and all that. Pero hindi sila yung mga oppressive rulers because egalitarian nga yung community Kung meron mga slave dyan, ay yun yung may mga utang, hindi makabayad, yung mga ganon. Then after payment of debts, then they acquire their regular status. May pagka-egalitarian talaga yung society natin. Men and women were both productive in the home and outside the home. Yun yung nakikita. But anthropologists kasi came later Contemporary societies na yung pinag-aaralan nila kung pumunta ka sa UST where the documents are there, or I went to Spain, I had my researches in several archives in Spain. There, I was given by the library yung mga accounts nga ng women natin. Kaya sabi ko, tinan mo, wala tayo talagang alam, and many should really go ahead and study some more. Yung prehistory time na yan. We have very little information about our origin before colonial Spain came.
All right. How about you, Jean? Were you aware? Did you know about the role of the babaylans before the Spaniards came?
I was only very loosely aware of it because of making sure that the history is alive right now, and we're learning more about it as we speak.
Thank you. But from your perspective, because
Or para lang tayong matriarchy.
I agree in a sense that you're egalitarian in the sense that all of our work, whether you're a woman or not, whether you're a woman, you're a man, it's important, it's valuable. But that's not the same as whether or not people look at men and women and the work that men or women do as equal. Because being a homemaker or a housewife,
Mm.
it's important, but people don't give the same value as that from someone a man who goes to the office. So they're both important and egalitarian in that sense. But it becomes patriarchal because of how people view the work that women do in in our society. So in terms of how people perceive the work women do, it's definitely patriarchal, but that doesn't diminish the value of women in society back then, and especially even now. And if you ask me, I definitely think that we're still patriarchal, considering all of the ways that women are oppressed to this day. For example, the violence against women is very pervasive, but women still have a difficult time escaping marriages because there's no divorce law, and there's just so many ways that patriarchy persists in the lives of women beyond the ways that studies can measure it, beyond numbers, beyond statistics. I feel like everyone in this room right now, you guys have all experienced na you have to lower your voice because there's a man in the room, or you always feel conscious because there's so men, there's so many men, and you don't
Mm.
feel safe. So that problem doesn't exist for men. Nah, they don't have a problem if they're in a room full of women. They're actually happy if they're in a room full of women. But everyone here, all of the women here, we all know what it's like to be always reminded that you're a woman, i.e., meaning you're smaller in society. So I definitely do think they're patriarchal because of that.
That's a good observation, Jean.
Patriarchy and matriarchy. Wala naman talagang talagang patriarchal lang societies up to now, except that because women have fought for laws, for equality, meron na tayong mga batas, except that women asserted talaga yung our role in the economy na we can be both productive, di ba? Ang OFW natin, majority are women, di ba? Yung mga ganyan. So,
Mm.
wala naman talaga tayong masasabi ngayon na matriarchy, wala. But if you say, kamukha sabi ni, sino to? Si Sarah ba yan?
Yes.
Yeah, Sarah. Sabi nga niya parang patriarchy, matriarchy on top, parang ganyan. Pero actually, underneath, the men are really more in control. Maraming situations na women feel, halimbawa ko, kung puro lalaki o gabi, lalabas kang mag-isa, di ba? Yung mga ganyan.
Oo.
Oo.
Yan yung sabi ni Jean kanina na nafi-feel
Oo.
tayong lahat women here.
Right.
Na-feel natin kung anong ibig sabihin nun to
Yes.
be in the presence of men.
Yeah.
Now, we have a question here from Leo Nil, and
Matriarchy and feminism.
feminism.
Matriarchy is the dominance of women in society. For example, merong mga legends or stories about society in which the rulers were women. The soldiers in their army were women, di ba? And then they are also into production. Yung talagang wala namang ganun eh. Wala naman talagang ganung society. Yun yung matriarchy. Pero what is feminism from the word feminine or feminus, female, femaleness? Ito yung nagsimula sa West eh. Because I think, mas malupit ang patriarchy sa West kaysa sa atin. Di ba? Kasi may winter doon, tsaka mahirap yung mga resources doon, may ganyan. So, yung production, yung defense, nasa kamay ng men because of the physical strength, di ba? And so the women were relegated sa bahay, tsaka yung panganganak, 9 months kang pregnant, nawawala ka rin talaga doon sa economic activities and all that. Nagkaroon na sila ng notion that the men are the breadwinners. They come home with the bacon, di ba? Pero ang women, nasa bahay lang, magluluto, ganyan, mag-aalaga ng bata and all that, domestic works. Kaya, yun yung reality. Pero yung matriarchy, meron sa legends, for example, yung panahon ni Urduha, legendary from Pangasinan, in which the leader was Urduha, and she had an army of women, yung mga ganyan, but legendary. Hindi naman actually nangyari yan sa Pangasinan, ano? But some societies, I don't know, historically, anthropologically, wala kaming masasite na ganyan na society in which the women ruled and governed. Talagang from the beginning of times, because siguro ng physical strength and defense and mga dangers and all that, the men were doing that, di ba? And the men were cooking and feeding and nare-relegate dun sa tasking na yan. Kaya parang ang tingin ng marami sa societies from the beginning of time, hindi nila maisip yung egalitarianism, kundi talagang the men have this privileged position na in society to defend the women, to take care of the family, yung mga ganyan. Pero in our case, parang hindi ganyan yung simula natin eh. Kaya iba talaga ang Philippine context kasi benevolent ang nature. We had so much in the beginning. Sabi nga ng mga friars, I read in one document when they arrived, wow, this is like paradise. They were entering Palawan. And yun ang nandun sa document, this is like paraiso. Yung ganyan. So, siguro, sa mga countries na deserts, may mga hard winters, ganyan, mas maagang nag-rise doon ng patriarchy, mas maaga din nag-rise doon ng social classes, class divisions, and all that. Kaya, iba talaga yung development ng West. Kaya din naman sila parating nagiging dominant kasi they were continuously dominating and practicing power, and the power was not only between classes but between men and women. Yun ang nangyayari. But in our case, nagsimula lang yung patriarchy na yan and through colonization by Spain. Meron tayong mga elites na they have more lands, they have more this, but their property and wealth was really for the community pag may crisis. Yung mga datos na mga yan, they were responsible for the community and their wealth was to share. Hindi talagang private property. The introduction of private property came with feudalism via Spain, capitalism via US, and up to now. Diba? That is the modern form of economy and production. Kaya I think kasi wala tayong knowledge about our beginnings. We were small barangays, independent from each other. We did not know. Kaya naman mahina ang nationalism natin. Ang nationhood natin mahina. We are so used to barangay and families and communities. Di ba? Even now, associations, NGOs, ganyan tayo. But talk of the nation, talk of love of country, verbal, easy, but actual, no. We prioritize families.
Right. Thank you for that perspective. That's very good, and I think it makes a lot of sense now that with the women's rights that the view is that these rights have been trampled on or are not present because of the patriarchy. And so this is a complex topic, but essentially that's what it is. How about you, Jean? Do you have any views on feminism or the difference between matriarchy and feminism?
My main understanding is that matriarchy refers to the system of governance, the system
Mm-hmm.
of our society and how it works. And like Prof. Faye said, I don't think we actually have a documented matriarchal society that's taken place in our history, unfortunately, or at least we may not have the records of it now in the Philippines. And
Right.
I think feminism is more contemporary in a sense because it's actually such a broad term because
Yes.
it's a line of studies, it can be an advocacy, it can just uh, be a line of thought. But it's a very
Mm.
broad, um, it's a broad thing that advocates ultimately for the same thing, which is female women empowerment and looking for those rights that were taken away from us.
Mm-mm. Yes.
Alam nyo yung word na feminism, feminus, faith minus, without So do you remember the story of Joan of Arc, di ba? What Joan of Arc underwent was an example because the patriarchy was there. Nahirapan si Joan of Arc. She wanted to be a soldier. She wanted to be equal to the men. And she had visions. Nobody would believe her. They thought she was
Mm.
insane. Yung mga ganyan. Di ba? The mental, physical, and emotional struggles that she had to undergo. That's a very good example of what Europe was at the time. Kaya feminism came from the West. Masyadong
Mm-mm.
oppressive ang patriarchy nila talaga.
Mm-mm.
And that's where the word comes from. Minus faith. Wala, yung mga women, wala yung faith. Oh, imagine mo yan. But we rehabilitated the word from it became feminism. It became our battle cry. Ni-reverse natin yung meaning ng word. These are women of
Mm.
faith, di ba?
Wow.
Feminism, women of faith, yeah.
I didn't know that, but in the male sex, for example, in the West, because of their environment, created this system of patriarchy and where
And
we had
classes, yeah.
and
And
classes, yes.
feudalism, yeah. And
Uh-huh.
capitalism, yeah.
Yeah. And so because of that, now we find ourselves here today looking at where we are. And so maybe I'd like to ask both of you, when we look at, for example, Philippine society and we see from history, we come from perhaps a society that was egalitarian. We had a prominent role for the women in society as babaylans. And then we now get to the point where we are colonized and Spain brings in that patriarchal society, and we see maybe competing interest even between the friars and the babaylans, etc. And then after 300 years we are liberated, and then fast forward to today, do you see any effects of this of our history playing out today? Do we see traces at least of the egalitarian society we had back then, or is it just remnants of the patriarchy that we're trying to work through in society now? Maybe Jean, you can go first.
the effect, the babaylan or the spirit of the babaylan still persists now? It's a very loaded question because we do see so many women in the Philippines fighting for our rights. And I think if you compare it to a lot of other more conservative countries, we're definitely much more progressive. But if we look at it now, we still see the scars of colonialism. I feel like it's like our nationalism is fighting with the scars of this colonialism because we have so many people fighting for their rights. Um, we have the spirit of the babaylands. We have our feminists. We have our scholars. We have those people who are constantly fighting for our rights, and then there are people who still actively try to suppress these rights as women, whether it's through politics, whether it's through economics or whatnot. I think if we're still fighting. We're still fighting the fight that we're still trying to undo the scars of colonialism. We're still trying to rediscover who we were before the Spaniards came. And it's such a hard question because we have to marry our identities as
Mm.
a country who was colonized and then who we were before that. Because a lot of the records were lost. A lot of our oral traditions are lost. Even our indigenous people now, they can't really tell the stories because they're suffering the systemic oppression as well. So how do we discover who we are now as a country? Like how do we find that? How do we marry who we are as women from before colonialism and after? So that's the question we're faced with now. But if you ask me, a lot of we're still suffering from colonialism, from the patriarchy that stemmed from the colonialism that we experienced. You see laws that would advocate for gender equality being suppressed at Congress. We see how our lawmakers, the disparity between the men and the women is incredible. You don't see it's really more men than women. And if you look at how many presidents we have, we only had two female presidents, and in and in the last election we also had only one female candidate. So
Mm.
the scars of colonialism still really bleed into how we live now. And in effect, patriarchy still permeates everything that we face as Filipinos.
Right. And I like that picture you present, though, that how do
So tough and all that. And look at First Lady Imelda Marcos, di ba? Beauty yung kanyang weapon, but Iron Lady, something like that, di
Mm.
ba?
Yeah.
Tama si Sarah na it's complicated, it's not easy, and we're still struggling. Tama siya. We still have a lot of, nandyan yung mga laws, but ang hirap naman pumunta sa korte, di ba? Halimbawa mo na harass ka sexually, nakakahiya din, di ba? Na rape ka, yung mga ganyan, it's not easy. It's not easy for women. Easier for men, yung mga ganyang issues. And when men joke, di ba, may mga jokes sila, may mga expressions expressions against women. Merong PUTA ina, yung mga ganyan, but walang PUTA ama, di ba? Yung mga ganyan. Meron silang mga verbalisms na wala ka talagang kalaban-laban, nababastos ka na lang talaga. Wala kang pang-counter na gano'n na equal na kabastos against the men. Diba? Wala. So, yan, tama. I felt what just Sarah said na it's still patriarchy there. But our women have been so assertive and so consistent in fighting for our dignity as women, not just as human being, but as women. Kaya naman marami tayong batas at saka hindi tayo basta pwedeng harasin o ganyanin, di ba? And generally in the world, ganyan. But pagdating na sa talagang business and all that, mararamdaman mo na who really holds the power. It's not us. It's really the men still in control of society. Mararamdaman mo yan eh. Halimbawa mo, mga karpintero nagtatrabaho dyan, medyo sexy ka, naglalakad, sisipulang ka. Do we do that to men?
Mm.
Hindi natin ginagawa yan sa lalaki, di ba? We never exercise dominance to any male or in a situation na ganyan, di ba? Sila yung body natin, yung sexiness natin is always an object, di ba? So, it's really there. Kaya nga, tama si Sarah na talaga it's there and it's a long struggle yet. But we have gains. Yun ang maganda rin naman. Like today, we have Women's Month. Di ba? Pero nagtanong nga sa akin, bakit Women's Month? Walang Men's Month. Because sabi ko, every day is Men's Day. Yun ang sagot ko. Siyempre nainis sa akin, di ba? What can you answer? Ginaganong ka na nga. Because every day is Men's Day. Diba? We have to have a Women's Month. At least a month for women, di ba? Oo, pero nakakainis din siguro itong battle of the sexes. You should really, hindi talaga siya magandang topic, di ba? Nakakainis din talaga. And ako, I taught women's studies at St. Scholastica for so long. And madali because they were all women. But merong few men minsan coming from College of Music or Arts at ganyan. Sila naman yung nado-dominate ng mga women. They experience the opposite naman. Sila naman yung naaapi. But that's rare. That's not the dominant society we have. Pag sa bastusan na, talagang talon-talo tayo. Wala tayong kalaban-laban.
Okay po. May tanong po tayo dito galing kay Jose.
Have respect for these women leaders. Like si Doña Chodora na nanay ni Rizal, sila Trinidad Texon, sila Magbanwa, Teresa Magbanwa, Trinidad Texon. They were generals. They had to wear pants and ride horses and carry mga sandata and fought in the revolution. Hindi sila binawalan. they opted to be like that, and they were there together with the men. I don't think they experienced discrimination. They were taken in as part of the forces that were fighting, And we have women leaders na kahit naman present day, sila Leticia Hani, di ba? Yung mga ganun, respected talaga, mga senators. Look at Laila de Lima. O, di ba? Fighting ang strength niya na talagang bibigay ka kung mahina ka. And I think ang nakakaproblema sa kanya is being a woman, nahihirapan siya talaga sa kanyang kalagayan, no? The majority of the men in the Senate, in the Congress, and everywhere in government, do you think they would side with her? Under Duterte or even under Bongbong? Hindi nila paparamdam yun that they all support her, or tayo pa rin talaga mag-a-affirm kay Laila. Di ba? Yung ganyan, hindi tayo basta, nandyan talaga yung patriarchy. Subtle lang talaga sa atin. Very subtle.
Yeah, more subtle. Yeah.
Yeah, more
So,
subtle.
Jean, how about you naman? I'd like to ask you.
It's such a big problem, but at the same time, that offers us the opportunity to do so many things in different spaces. So whether you're in the academe, and like the Prof. Whether in academe, making sure that the history of women, empowered women, is recorded, or whether you're on the streets or protesting for women's rights, or whether you're the lone female senator in the in the house, or in the Congress, you have to fight whatever fight you can, because there's so many. The problem is so wide and so encompassing that it allows us a space to fight, in no matter, like, in whatever way we can. So whether you're a mother, if you raise a good son, then that's already such a plus for women's rights. If you're if you're in a group protesting, or like trying to lobby for a bill that will give women more rights, women and minor groups more rights, that's already a good fight. Um, Whether, even like, if you're a person, if you're a woman and you feel disempowered, you have siguro may internalized misogyny ka, and you don't know, and you have that sense of hatred of being a woman. If you can overcome that, that's also a plus for women's rights and for feminism. So because a war is so big, there's so many battles that you can win.
Right. And so, for example, maybe I hope you don't mind, Jean. I'll put you on the spot.
target for gender-based harassment. It's proven that, especially in the case of Maria Ressa, who's facing so many lawsuits. And I remember saying before na they analyzed the statistics and saw that a lot of the comments towards her specifically are gender-based threats. So, so they're all horrible. The being a woman in this field makes you a target for gender-based harassment, and knowing that the field is already so dangerous as is, knowing that the state tries to suppress
Yeah.
press freedom, knowing that there's systemic misinformation and disinformation, women become so much more vulnerable just for the fact that they're women. And it's unfortunately the world that we live in today. Now we have to fight so that our voices are heard.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so no, you're an easy target. Plus, they have more
From my days as a campus journalist, now you always have to assert yourself because you only have one moment to ask your question, to push yourself in. So I think being a journalist also helped me as a woman to like really push myself to get into that space so that I can raise my voice and do my job basically.
right.
So I can hold people accountable.
Wow, that's good, no?
Yeah.
I mean, it's you're talking about it you doing that in your space, but really that's what we all need to remember, that we need to be able to take that moment, find our voice, raise it in that space, grab that opportunity to do it. And so yeah, I think that's one takeaway we can bring with us, and maybe a simple way actually that everyone listening, yung mga nakikinig ngayon, can promote gender equality, 'di ba? Yung minsan, 'di ba, discussed, and there's a lot of conversation about what that means. And so for both of you, I'd like to ask, how could this change, this fight for women's rights, or this fight for equality, how could this change in the future, or will it even change if we're talking about equality in general, equality for all genders? I mean, the Philippine Commission on Women has talked about going, or their theme being one for gender equality and an inclusive society. And so does that change anything, or does it just mean that it is a broader scope now, the front is broader? Jean, maybe you'd like to go first.
Oh, I assume this this means now we're talking about the the fight of the LGBTQ plus as well.
I am that's where I'm going, because the Philippine Commission on Women has announced that they're actually
will always be in it's always going to intersect with the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. So because women pa lang, we're already oppressed. So what more of this community that's already finding itself, that's been fighting to exist, who's had their existence um, systemically wiped away, systemically oppressed. Um, these are also a group of people who have needed to fight for their space just to exist. Just they're not even asking for extra privileges. They're not asking for special rights. They're asking for their human rights, and I think that's something that women and the LGBTQ will always intersect with. So
mm,
the fight for gender equality will always be tied to that. Feminism
right.
without consideration for the LGBTQ plus community, it's not feminism. I'm of the opinion that it's not feminism anymore, because both women and LGBT, they stray away from the mainstream. They stray away from the patriarchal societies basically. So both of these groups, they intersect. There's so many women in the LGBTQ plus. They're their fight exists without oppression. It's always going to be linked, if you ask me.
Okay, I see that. And so, from my question, I think your perspective is that it's going to just be a broader scope, no? Na itong dalawang sections, they're going to be fighting the same battle for equality and inclusivity, right? So, Prof. Peb, would you like to weigh in on this? Do you
Yeah,
see?
because I belong to the older
the-
generation. And I take the God's commandment. And when I was asked in high school what's God's first commandment, I said, increase and multiply. And I got a scolding from the nuns and the priest there, who was a Czechoslovakian pa naman, foreigner. And he said, where did you get that first commandment? But that's the first, sabi ko. And he said, increase and multiply. And that was addressed to Adam and Eve. So I
Mm,
think it's the creation of more people that God wants to have more souls, more people. And if you ask me whether homosexuality will increase population or decrease population, but tama ito. What's her name? My companion now.
si
Si
Jean.
Jean.
This is
Sorry, Gina.
Jean.
I'm 85 years old. Mahina na yung memory. So I said, human beings, ang hirap talaga ng struggle ng LGBT. If you ask me. Harder than women, I think, in a way. We only recognize LGBTs who are skilled and talented and famous and all that, no? But ordinary LGBTs and all that, mas mahirap talaga. And my heart goes out to them na kamukha ng women na talagang nababastos at na-oppress. It's the same feeling. And when God said increase and multiply, ang daming mga children na orphans, walang parents. So those who will not have children can adopt, di ba? Adoption. So there must be a solution somewhere that all genders must be equal and human beings talaga. Walang discrimination whatsoever. Kasi,
Right.
yeah. Because real yung LGBT. Real yan. And if you ask the history of each one, it will break your heart, di ba? what they have to go through, except if they are famous and all of this. But yung mga ordinary, the butt of jokes and all that, di ba? Kapareho din ang sa women. So, tama si Gina, talagang women and the LGBTs will have the same struggle, the same fight, and we will be together in this throughout. Because yung pagkatao mo na yung hinahamak hindi ba? Ano ba ang definition mo ng tao? Di ba? Is that based on mannerisms, gender characteristics, whatever, di ba? Tao is tao, di ba? So, dapat ganon. And yun nga, nung nagtuturo ako ng women's studies where the men are in the minority in that school, I felt that they were intimidated and naging quiet sila, hindi sila assertive kasi majority mga babae yung classmates nila. Nafe-feel din nila. And then lalo na kung gay nga, male gay, di ba? Yung pa. Unless talagang talented sila, mga writers, mga ganito, mga directors, mga ganyan. Otherwise, hindi hindi. Kaya tama, gender equality, regardless of what gender it is. Pareho-pareho yan.
All right. So we're winding up our conversation this evening. Before we go, any last words? Jean, would you like to go first?
I think my last words would be, I think that a lot of men don't understand is that women always have to speak louder just so that they can be heard. We're not allowed to make the same mistakes as men do because we're not afforded the same patience. No one says girls will be girls. So we don't have any excuses because there's so many things we're expected to be. We're expected to be beautiful, strong, thin, or whatnot, all of those things. So I think that there's really no shortage of shame in the world for women. And for women, life becomes a process of healing from all the shame, trauma, and pain that the world inflicts upon us. And through the process, we learn how to raise our voice. We learn how to love deeper and to fight stronger.
Yeah, my last word is whatever gender you are, we are all human beings. There should be compassion and love and equality for everyone. Yung pagkatao ang importante. Magpakatao, maging tao, and that's it. I think God created us to be like that. And ang pinakamasakit talaga yung mahama ka bilang tao. Hindi ba yung mga landlords pag hinahamak yung mahihirap may kasama pang panlalait sa pagkatao. Kaya it's so horrible. It's so cruel talaga. That should stop. And women and LGBTs should really assert that we are human beings, di ba? And we cannot be treated less than human beings. Yung ganon. Be kind, be loving.
All right. Thank you. Thank you po, Prof. Feb. Jean, thank you so much for sharing perspectives tonight. And I think, na if anything, everyone who's listening, marami tayong nababasa or naririnig sa news ang Philippines daw, sa 2022 Global Gender Gap Index, 19th out of 146 countries, meaning pataas tayo doon na we're high up there in terms of optimal gender parity. Pero sa usap-usapan natin ngayong gabi, nakikita talaga natin na kahit meron tayo ng spirit ng babaylan, that's why we have women leaders who are able to actually marry the spirit of the babaylan where they are now. They have historical figures to look to. Still, these leaders need to enter into and fit into a system that does favor the patriarchy, that does require you to be more like a man. And so we see that while the gender gap has closed, this really isn't the case on the ground. And so
Lalo
ultimately,
if we are Filipinos.
So Yun,
Yeah.
lalo na if we're Filipino. So ultimately, yung ating nakikita ngayon is talagang equality and inclusiveness kasi tao tayong lahat. Yun yung ating nakita sa usapang ito ngayon na hindi siya nagmamatter, lalaki ka man, babae ka man, LGBTQIA. Ang pagkatao mo ay in itself requiring of respect, of dignity, and we see that in our laws, and we see that even in international conventions. But maybe what we would hope to see is that we would see that in our interactions with one another. And so before we go tonight, no, we had the question earlier. Ang galing nga ng tanong, si Kuya Danny Agoncillo, he asked naman, what does the Bible say about patriarchy, matriarchy, and feminism? And so maybe I would leave Kuya Danny and everyone else who's watching tonight, no, just some words also to tie it back in to the perspective that we have from the Bible. And we see that in the Bible, for example, Jesus and his relationship with women is very telling of the kind of equality and inclusiveness that he lived out in his life. We will see God coming before Jesus and coming to Mary and elevating her. We see God revealing to Anna that Jesus was coming. We see that Jesus had around him Mary Magdalene. He had Joanna, who was the wife of the manager of Herod's household, Susanna. And these were disciples who even supported Jesus financially. We had his dear friends, Martha and Mary. Jesus broke cultural barriers at that time. He even went out of his way to see and meet with the Samaritan woman. He defended the woman who was caught in adultery. And when Jesus was crucified, women were the last to leave the crucifixion site, and they were the first at the tomb. They were the first witnesses. And so all of these things that we see in the Bible, actually, in the narratives of how Jesus interacted with women, you would see that Jesus countered the prevailing notions of the day during that time of how women were viewed in society and women's place in society. And so we see that actually it's the cross of Christ that is the great equalizer. We see in John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." That's whoever. That's
Yes.
all inclusive. It leaves no one out. Whether, what position you hold in society, your mental capacity, or your gender. We also have another passage in Galatians, that's in Galatians 3, that speaks of our equal opportunity also of salvation. You are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And so we see that there is no sexism at the cross. And so while in this world, yes, we will continue to struggle for equality, for inclusiveness, and it will get disheartening at times. But I hope that if there's anything also that we can take away tonight, that we believe there is a reason for hope. And with that, I would like to invite everyone to tune in on March 16. Our next episode, we will be interviewing women in leadership and asking them about their personal experiences. And also, if you would like to listen to this episode, perhaps on your way to work while you're commuting, pwede din kayong makinig sa Spotify, Isip